Your thoughts on Mo being the first unanimous selected member of the Baseball Hall of Fame is what, Joe?
Well, not surprised. Again, there are certain philosophies, I guess, on behalf of the writers that some, don't feel that anybody should go in on the first ballot, and and then I read something about closer only pitches one inning, and but you have to realize how important those 3 outs were. I can tell you that. But he was, for as long as he pitched, Rich, and I know totals will show you that, he really never changed the kind of pitcher he was. There are so many pitchers, and especially, relief pitchers, who've had to change their style because their stuff was diminished. But Mariano really never, once he discovered that cutter, he just learned to do different things with it, and he just became a little more of a complete pitcher. But it didn't surprise me, really, that he was unanimous, because it'd be tough for me to be the one to say, well, give me a reason not to put him on, the ballot.
Right. I mean, you mentioned the 3 outs being so important. When he first started as a reliever, it was really 6 outs you were getting from him on average prior to Wetland in 7th and 8th innings of that 96 season. When you first got to New York as the manager, and he was a kid that had 10 starts in the 95 season, what did you see the first time you laid eyes on Mariano Rivera, Joe?
Well, Rich, the first time I saw him was on TV the year before when he pitched against Seattle in that final game. I guess it was Game 5, and where the Yankees lost Game 5 after being up 2-0, and watched him come out of that bullpen in that extra inning game, and he looked pretty impressive. Of course, then you hear the stories about, surgery, and he had some issues. So he was in spring training with us in '96, and I'm a lifelong National League guy, and everything was new for me, and he had no options left, so we knew he was on the team. There was some scuttlebutt, and when Jeter was scuffling all spring, there was some talk about sending him to the minor leagues and making a deal for a shortstop, and Mariano was mentioned in that supposed deal. So he was sort of excess baggage at that time, even though you knew he had some kind of value. But who would have dreamed that he would have be sitting there in the Hall of Fame at this point?
Joe, you just gave me a little bit of a heart attack, even though I know the way everything worked out. You're saying that there was a possibility of not starting Jeter in '96 and sending Rivera packing for his replacement? Is that what you're telling me, Joe? That was possible? That's
public knowledge. Yeah, toward the end of spring training, there was a comment from one of George's advisors that that Derek may not be ready because he didn't have a particularly good spring. And I'll tell you, when that season started, it was like somebody just flipped a switch. But it got late in the spring, and I was one of the dissenters on that. I said, no, we've had him here all spring, and this kid shows up every day and really hasn't done anything wrong. He hasn't hit, but spring training doesn't really bother me. And there was some conversation, and part of the conversation was, we have all these relief pitchers. We had Wetland, we had Bob Wickman, and then, of course, Mariano Rivera, who we didn't know was going to be a closer, and we discovered that in '96 when, as you mentioned earlier, he was the setup man for Wetland. And so he was sort of a pitcher that we didn't know what his role was because, his options were used up, so he was obviously going to stay with the team. And there was some talk about, training him for a Fermin, I think it was, from Seattle, and again, I don't know how close that got to being made. I know it was talked about.
In the same way that I watch a movie like Miracle, right? I know how it's going to finish, but my heart races when you see those hockey scenes, right?
Every time.
You know how it finishes. You know the story. It's one of the most told sports stories of all time. Your heart Just beats like crazy. And I know Mariano Rivera is the first unanimous selected player in the history of the Baseball Hall of Fame, and Jeter might be number 2 next year. And I know how many championships they won together with Joe Torre. But just hearing Torre tell me that Mariano Rivera was on the block for Felix Fermin because
Jeter wasn't
Jeter
ready.
was struggling in spring training in '96. I got cold sweats. My stomach dropped. I'm still affected by it. And he's like, that's public knowledge. Maybe in the newspapers in '96. I have not heard that conversation.
My baseball people said Ken Phelps.
That's right. My baseball people said Felix Fermin. Felix Fermin. What the hell did you trade Rivera for?
Oh.
What?
Man.
I'm freaking out, and I knew it worked out, and it didn't happen.
Talk about a what if, man.
The Rich Eisen Show, weekdays at noon Eastern on Audience.